Hi, I'm Tess Marty, or Tess Tattoo if you know me on Instagram. I'm a permanent makeup artist from Vancouver, Canada, and I specialize in lip tattooing. The reason that I'm making this video today is because on the Facebook groups regarding permanent makeup, I see a lot of people who struggle when it comes to predicting their healed results and choosing color for their clients. So what I want to go over today in this video is how to predict your healed results so that no matter what client walks in the door, you can have satisfied customers. What we'll be discussing in this video is skin structure and how pigments heal in the skin over time. We'll also be discussing the tools you use and how the tools you use affect the way you work, and also clients' skin complexions and how that relates to the colors that you use as well. Knowing all these things will help you achieve the healed results that you want to achieve on every specific person, because every client is individual and you need to know how to adjust and modify your technique and your pigments for every particular client in order to achieve their healed results. You really want to make sure that you watch this whole video, because throughout the video, I'm going to be giving information that I've never discussed before in any of my online courses. This is a diagram of our skin. There are three main layers. The first layer is the epidermis, which is right at the top. It has 5 sublayers, and it also is the area that houses our melanin, protecting us from the sun and also giving pigmentation to our skin. It's about 1 millimeter thick, and it sheds every 4 to 6 weeks. The dermis is the middle layer of the skin. It is about 2 millimeters thick, and it holds our hair follicles and sweat glands. It's also the area that we tattoo, and it does not shed every 4 to 6 weeks. The last layer of skin is the subcutaneous layer here at the bottom. It is important to remember that this layer is not actually skin, and if you tattoo too deep into the skin, it will cause the pigment to blow out in this area. As you can see, lip tissue is a little bit different than facial tissue. Lip tissue does not have sweat glands or hair follicles. The stratum corneum is also only 3 to 4 layers thick, whereas on regular lip tissue, it's about 16 layers thick. The stratum corneum is the top layer of the epidermis, which prevents against moisture loss. Because the stratum corneum is so thin, this is why you commonly see blood vessels through people's skin, which gives their lips the rosy color. That being said, on every person, this lip tissue is thicker or thinner depending on the client. Something really important to note when it comes to lip tattooing about skin is that the epidermis layer of the skin actually gets thicker the closer you get to the mucus area. The reason this is so important to note is because the thicker the skin gets here, the harder it will be to implant pigment and the more that skin sheds. Another reason it's important to note is because the epidermal layer here is so thick, it will give a more diffuse look to your healed pigment in that area. Which means it's really important for you to make sure that you're getting deep enough when you tattoo the inner area of the lip. It's also really important that you implant enough pigment there so that in your healed results, you're not left with empty pigment space here. So because this area of the inner lip is thicker, it's going to be harder to tattoo and harder to retain, which means you need to compromise so that your healed results all heal evenly. The way I like to compromise is I tattoo the skin a little deeper here, and I also implant a little extra pigment just for safety. Because the outer area of the lip near the vermilion border has a thinner epidermal layer, I actually don't tattoo as deep there, and I don't apply as much pigment. So because I'm not applying as much pigment on the edges, but the epidermal layer is thinner, it retains pigment very well. But the inner area being thicker will not retain the pigment as well. So I always make sure that I just do a little extra there, so in my healed results, everything heals nice and even. Sometimes in certain clients who have more melanin in their skin, especially those who smoke or have sun damage, you may notice that they have some hyperpigmentation or darker areas along the mucus area. Again, because the epidermis is so thick here, it will be extremely difficult to even this out and nearly impossible. When my client walks through the door, there's 4 things that I look for that help me dictate how I will use my tools, what pigments I'm going to choose, and how I will work in order to achieve specific healed results for that client. Those 4 things are their Fitzpatrick Scale or complexion, their age, their skin translucency or thickness, and if there's any melanin present in their lips. The Fitzpatrick Scale is a scale I refer to, which categorizes my clients into specific skin tone complexions. There are 6 categories. The lower the number, the less melanin that client will have in their skin. This scale was created by Thomas B. Fitzpatrick in order to dictate how certain skin tones will react to UV light. So the higher the number on the scale, the more melanin-rich that person's skin will be, protecting their skin from the sun. Those who have more melanin in their skin naturally come from high sunlight environments like Africa, South America, or even Asia. The reason that this scale is important to refer to and why it's important to identify what Fitzpatrick your client is because the higher the number is on the Fitzpatrick scale of your client, the more melanin they may have present in their lips. Melanin in the skin is important for us to pay attention to because it affects how our healed results work and come out. This is something that we will be discussing later on and throughout the video. So this is my beautiful client. She's not actually a client, but for this demonstration, she will be. As you can see, she's about a Fitzpatrick 3, which means she sometimes tans, she may burn, and she does come from an ethnic background of a high sunlight environment. In her skin, you can see that she does have nice golden tones and she does have melanin. So she's not super pale. The second thing I look at when my client walks in is how thin or how thick or how translucent their skin is. It's really easy to tell if somebody has thick or translucent thin skin. The thin and translucent skin will be more shiny, whereas the thicker skins will not be translucent and they will not be shiny. They will also have more wrinkles in their skin. When somebody comes through the door and their skin I can see is very thin and translucent and you can see the blood through the skin, they're kind of blue, they might be a little bit rosy. I do work a lot more gentle than I would if I had a client who comes in who has very thick skin. Because that client's skin may be thicker, it's going to be more difficult to tattoo, which means you want to stretch harder, go a bit deeper, and apply maybe a little bit more pressure while you're working. This may mean for a thicker skinned client, you may want to do more passes of pigment or even use a brighter color so that you can achieve nice healed results on their skin. Whereas on someone who has thinner skin, their skin will accept and show the pigment very easily in the healed result. When we talked about the epidermis being thicker earlier, I mentioned that in certain people that epidermal layer on the lips will be thicker or thinner. The thicker that epidermal layer is and the thicker the skin is, the more of a diffuse look it creates for healed results in lip tattooing. This is an example of a client of mine who had very thin skin. As you can see the blood through her skin, which makes her lips look very cool. Her lips are also quite shiny. This is an example of a client of mine who had thicker skin. As you can see, her skin doesn't look translucent, and she has a lot of texture and wrinkles in her skin. Generally, people who have more melanin or who go higher on the Fitzpatrick scale will have thicker skin in their lips unless they have filler. Somebody with really good youthful skin will accept and heal beautifully with the pigment, whereas others who may not have as beautiful skin or who have scarring will not heal so beautifully with the pigment, even if you're the best tattoo artist in the whole world. Our tattoos can only heal as good as our canvas, so if your client has sun damage, scarring, cold sore scarring, it may affect your healed results. I just want to run over a few examples of thick versus thin skin so you can see the difference. Here is a client of mine who has thick skin. Here's a client of mine who has thin skin. As you can see, her skin is more translucent and more shiny and has less texture. Here's another example of a client who has thicker skin. As you can see, her skin is not very translucent and it also does not have a lot of shine to it. Here's an example of a client of mine who has thin skin. As you can see, her skin is more shiny, translucent, and it does show a little bit of that blood flow underneath. Here's another example of somebody who has thin skin. As you can see, the skin is quite translucent. Here's another client with thick skin. As you can see, it's very wrinkled and textured and you cannot see through the skin. Here's another example of a client who has really thin skin. As you can see, her skin does not have wrinkles and is very see-through. Here's another example of a client who has thick skin. As you can see, she has no translucency. General rules, clients who are higher on the Fitzpatrick scale or clients who have more melanin in their skin or lips are going to have thicker skin. Clients who have less melanin in their skin or lips are going to have thinner skin. Clients with lip filler will have thinner skin. Those who are older will have thinner skin. Those who you can see through, those who have shiny lips, and those who have non-textured or non-wrinkled lips will be thin. As far as what's better to tattoo, it's up to the client. Everybody has good skin and bad skin regardless of the thickness. One thing I can say though is that if somebody does have thinner skin, their skin will be more delicate and fragile. Therefore, you want to work at slower speeds and more delicate, more shallow, and more gentle. Versus somebody who has thicker skin, you want to make sure that the pigment is actually going in because their skin can be quite resistant, so you may have to use a little bit more force when you tattoo. The third thing I look at when a client walks in is their age. Why does this matter for permanent makeup? Well, because the more mature you are, the more retention you will have, and also the thinner your skin could be. So when I have a mature client come in, I want to be really sensitive about my color choices because they will show up really powerful in the healed results. Just like those who have thinner skin, the healed results will show up more powerful because there's less diffusion of the pigment in the epidermal layers of the skin. One important tip, I do find Fitzpatrick 1 to 3 mature women, especially when you're using titanium dioxide pigment, which is a pigment with white in it, pull peachy. This is based on the colors that I use, which is Ever After pigments and some tattoo inks, but that's just a little tip for you. So oftentimes when I have a mature one, I always pick my colors a little bit more conservative, knowing that they will retain the pigment really strongly, and I'm not shy about the cool colors if they have no melanin present in their lips. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but generally because pigments fade a little bit cooler, I always like to modify my pigments or go a little bit warmer initially. But with my older clients, I don't mind doing something a little bit more neutral or something a little bit more cool just because they do pull peachier in the healed results. The last thing I consider when a client walks in is how much melanin is actually present in the lip itself, meaning how dark is that person's lip. The darker the client's lip is, the more I'm gonna be limited with color choice, and also, generally, the more thicker their skin will be. Those who do not have any melanin present in their lips will be more like tattooing on a blank piece of paper. In the healed results, the color will show up more true and more bright. For example, if I'm tattooing a client who has really pale lips, a color like this is gonna show up amazing in the healed results. Whereas in a client like this who has a lot of darkness, this pigment will not show up as well because there's not that much contrast. Even if somebody does not have any melanin present in their lips, it's also important to consider the saturation of their lips or how bright the natural color of their lips is. For example, you can see that this client has very saturated natural lips. So this color is very similar to her natural lips. In a healed result, this color is not gonna make a big difference to her natural lip color because there's very little contrast going on between these two colors. Whereas in this client who has really, really white, pale lips, this color is actually gonna show up a lot more in the healed result because there's more contrast going on. Okay, let's go over a few examples now that we know the 4 main things. So this is our client here. She's about a Fitzpatrick 3. She does have a little bit of melanin on her lips just on the top, which is important for us to consider. Next, her lip skin is quite thick. It's not very translucent, and she does have quite a bit of texture. But her natural lip color is very pale, which means she'll pick up color very well, but we need to do more pigment deposit and create more opacity with the amount of pigment that we're depositing in her skin for it to show up in the healed results because her skin is thicker. She's also on the younger side, which means that her skin won't retain as well as a more mature client. Here's another potential client. As you can see, she's about a Fitz 2, Fitz 3. She has thin skin. You can tell because her skin is very transparent. She's youthful, and she has no melanin present in her lips. For a client like this, I would definitely work more gently. Because her lips are quite transparent, any pigment you deposit in her skin will show up quite clear in the healed results. Here's another client. She's about a Fitzpatrick 3. She has no melanin present in her lips are quite pale, and her skin is thick because you cannot see through it, and she's young. So she's gonna be an easy client to tattoo. You may just have to deposit a little bit more pigment or work with a little bit more force in order to ensure the pigment gets into the skin so that it heals beautifully. Here's another client. She's about a Fitz 5, Fitz 6. As you can see, she does have melanin presence in her lips. Her lips are quite thick because they do have a lot of texture and you can't see through them. For this type of client, you definitely want to make sure that you're stretching well, you have a little bit more pressure on the tip of your needle, you're depositing a lot of pigment, and you're using brighter colors. If you use something too natural on this client or not opaque enough, it will not show up in the healed result. Another thing that affects the way your healed results come out is the way you work. And you need to be able to know how to work for specific clients so that you can adjust your technique and adjust your healed results based on that client's specific requirements. There are two main things in tattooing that affect the way your healed results heal. The first one is depth. The deeper you go, the cooler a pigment will turn out and the less true to color it will turn out. The second thing is the way that you lay your pigment in the skin. So how much coverage you are providing in the skin. Obviously, the more pigment you deposit in the skin, the more opaque or the more covered or the more fake looking that tattoo will be in the skin. In tattooing, we apply coverage with the tattoo in two ways. One is with the pigment you use. We'll get into this later, but sometimes specific pigments you use can have more opacity and sometimes others can have less. In tattooing, obviously the more pigment you lay into the skin will create opacity. This means that the tattoo again will come out more fake looking, it'll be more covered, it'll be more even, and you won't see as much as the natural lip tissue shining through. Learning how to adjust the way your strokes or your pixels go into the skin affects the finish of how the tattoo heals and the look of it, rather than how it affects the color. So for example, if you have one red pigment and you use a sheer and translucent application of this into the skin, meaning that your pixels aren't so close together and your strokes are a little bit more further apart, you'll have a more airy, natural healed result as more of the client's natural lip tissue is coming through. Whereas if you pack this in with a lot of coverage, you create a lot of opacity and the results become more lipstick looking, even though the color is the same for both techniques. In certain cases, you need opacity. You need a lot of pigment deposit in order to cover or neutralize dark lips, in order to provide a big transformation to a client who wants to completely change her lips. Otherwise, it's nice to give a nice natural finish to younger clients or to clients who want just a more natural result. So in that case, you wouldn't put as much pigment in the skin. If you don't put enough pigment in the skin for somebody who has thicker lips or for somebody who has dark lips, the healed results will be almost like nothing. On thicker skins or dark lips, at first, if you don't deposit a lot of pigment, it might look really pretty and natural when it's freshly done. However, in the healed results, it'll be like nothing. Whereas in thinner skins, if you apply a sheer application, in the healed result, because that skin is more translucent, the color will show up beautifully. So to conclude all of this, thicker and darker lips require more passes in order for the healed results to be better, or to show up better. So if you're struggling and you find that your healed results aren't showing up really well, there could be a number of factors, but one of them might just be the amount of pigment you're putting in the skin. You have to put a sufficient amount of pigment in the skin according to the color and according to the client's skin conditions so that your client has a beautiful healed result once the tattoo is fully healed. Another really important thing to consider while you're tattooing is you want to really monitor how the pigment is showing up in the skin. If the pigment is showing up quite easily, that probably means that the client has thinner skin or just good skin. If the pigment is having a difficult time showing up while you're working, it probably won't really show up in the healed results either. So that's a good indication or good feedback to you in case you need to change the color to something brighter or you need to do more passes in order for that client to have a good healed result. Now quickly, I'm just going to demonstrate the difference between a light coverage and a difference between a full coverage shading technique. What I'm using is I'm using the Bishop Power Wand. This is the Packers, my favorite machine. I've been using it for years. I'm using it with the battery pack and I'm just using a Mass Tor needle. It's a 1RL and it's 0.30 millimeters. When I'm making a light coverage result, I make sure that my strokes are a little bit far apart and that I'm not doing much overlap in the skin. When my shading is more dense or opaque, I make sure that my strokes are more close together and I do a lot more overlapping in the skin in a single pass. Obviously, the more pigment you deposit in the skin, the more opaque the tattoo will turn out. This goes for any client. But again, it's really important to remember that thinner skins will show the tattoo more because there's more transparency and there's less of that thick epidermal layer to diffuse the pigment. So for thinner skins, I prefer to do a more airy, light shading with lots of space and build the color up slowly in layers. This creates a really nice natural result when it heals, but it also shows the pigment quite well. In thicker skins, doing that same technique is not going to translate the same as there's a thicker epidermal layer to diffuse the pigment. So what I like to do for thicker skins is I add more opacity by creating more pigment deposit in the skin. When it comes to lip tattooing, because I work with a lot of thick skins, and because I use a lot of numbing which hardens the skin, I prefer a more powerful machine. This is why I prefer the Bishop Wand Packer. It's a 4.2 stroke, which means that the needle goes farther back before the stroke kicks back and punctures the needle into the skin. In permanent makeup and body tattooing, there are various types of machines. What really dictates a machine is its stroke length. In a tattoo machine, what dictates the stroke length is how far around the plunger bar or the needle goes around the cam. This circle here that's attached to the bar that hits the needle spins around in a circle. And the farther it spins around or the wider it spins around, the harder it's gonna punch because it has more drawback. In permanent makeup, it's really common to use shorter stroke lengths because they create smoother blends and they create less trauma in the skin. Of course, I do this because it depends how you work. The reason I prefer a harder hitting machine or a machine with a higher stroke length is because I like to be able to have the freedom to adjust my hand pressure and my speed to create either softer results or more harsh, opaque results with the one machine that I use on any skin type. Versus with a softer hitting machine, you don't have as much freedom or versatility to adjust your hand pressure or technique on any given skin type. I don't like the shorter stroke lengths because I find them very restricting. Whereas this one, because it punches a little harder, I can lighten my pressure or go slower to reduce the force impact to create those smoother, more natural results. Versus with a shorter stroke length, because it's already at such a low, soft setting, it's really hard to get that pigment or that needle into the skin harder while the stroke length is already hitting the skin so soft. However, because this machine has a higher stroke length, which means it punches the skin harder, it can create more pixelated results. Versus a shorter stroke machine doesn't hit the skin as hard, so it's going to produce more of a soft blend. Again, this is totally dependent on how the artist works the machine, but that is a general rule. Higher stroke machines are better for packing color and for outlining, while shorter stroke machines are better for soft shading. A harder hitting machine is also going to be better for thicker skin types. Again, you get versatility with this, whereas the softer hitting machines or the shorter stroke machines, those are going to be extremely difficult to use on thicker skin types. I'm not going to talk too much about technique protocols in this video, but I do want to talk about two types of finishes for lip tattooing. This is an example of my work. This is a before and after. And as you can see, the lip is colored in or shaded in very evenly. So it's even across the whole lip. This is called lip blush. But as you can see, it's completely even. There are no gaps and there are no particular locations that stand out in shading more than another. When this heals, it'll heal really natural and smooth and even. This is another example of a different style of lip tattooing, which is called ombre lips. This is where we particularly place the pigment more strongly on the outer edges and blend it in. When this heals, you get a really nice ombre effect. The reason I'm mentioning this is because there are a lot of artists out there who do spot treatment, or when they neutralize dark lips, they only neutralize the dark areas, and this is something that I never recommend. The reason I don't recommend target correcting or spot treatment or only tattooing certain areas of the lips is because when you deposit pigment in a certain area of the lip, when it heals, you'll see that tattoo only in that specific area. So it's going to look very uneven, unnatural, and fake. So when I'm doing a dark lip neutralization, I always tattoo the whole thing to ensure that my client has an even healed result finish. And that's not just in color, but also in coverage and pigment application. Another thing that affects the way the tattoo looks when it's healed is how the skin actually processes the pigment during the healing process. When your tattoo is healing, the epidermal layer completely sheds off. So a lot of the pigment that gets trapped in there during the tattooing process sheds off, revealing a softer color underneath once healed. Generally in my healed results, I find about 30 to 50% of the tattoo actually comes out during the healing process, and the color softens about 30 to 50% due to the new epidermal layer diffusing the pigment underneath. Another thing that affects healed results is how well someone's cells are working in their skin. In your skin, there's cells called macrophages, and they're part of your lymphatic drainage system. What these cells do is they act like janitors, cleaning up any foreign objects in the skin. So when the tattoo particles enter the skin, they eat it up and move it around. They do this until the end of 6 weeks. This is a demonstration of how ink is injected and then heals into the skin. So as you can see in this close image here, the ink is injected into the dermal layer of the skin. The ink settles, and then after the epidermal layer sheds off, the pigment settles just into that dermis layer of the skin. Initially, when the tattoo is just finished, it looks a lot like lipstick and it looks really intense. But because a lot of that tattoo actually comes out with the epidermis once it sheds, you get a really diffused look with the pigment once it heals in the skin. Something to remember is that the epidermis is what holds our pigmentation, is what holds our melanin. So if somebody does have a lot of melanin in their skin, that melanin will come back over top of the pigment and could diffuse the healed result even more, having it show up even less depending on how much melanin that client has in their lips. When the tattoo heals, scabs begin to form. And the more scabs a client has, the more shedding is going on. So to retain more pigment or to have more even healed results, we want to make sure that the client has less scabbing or less of that epidermal shed. So what we do in our aftercare kits is we give clients a little bag full of cotton rounds mixed with distilled water and soap. What they're told to do is to take one of these every hour right after the tattoo on the first day and give their lips a hard wipe. What this will do is it'll get rid of any lymphatic fluids that are forming scabs to ensure that they have less scabbing during the healing process and better retention. Another thing that we tell them to do is to apply ointment on their lips for 5 days to keep them moisturized and to not pick the scabs. This will ensure for better healed results and more even retention. So we give them these two things, which is our aftercare ointment. It's an A&D with lanolin, and we give them the cotton rounds with the soap. This is our aftercare cards. We have the healing process, and then on the back, we have the do's and don'ts. In order to know how to predict our healed results specifically, we need to really understand color and how to identify it and the characteristics of color. There are 4 things that differentiate colors from one another. The first thing that differentiates one color from another is its hue. Hue is basically what the color is. Hue is the base color. Think as in like a rainbow. You have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Those are hues. Pink, beige, baby blue, those are not hues. Those are variations of the hues. So here's the example. You have yellow, orange, red, purple, blue, green. Every color that you see has a hue. We know that pinks are oftentimes tints of red. So this color, for example, the hue of it would be red. The next thing that characterizes and differentiates a specific color is how saturated it is. This means how pure is that color, how bright is it, how intense is it. For example, a color like this, the saturation is not very high because the color is not very pure. You can see on this color, the saturation of this color is very high because the color is very pure. The third thing that differentiates a color is how light or dark it is on a scale of black to white. So this color, for example, has a dark value as it's closer to black. This color has a light value as it's really white. This color has about a medium value. The last thing that differentiates a color is its temperature. Temperature can be really confusing for a lot of permanent makeup artists, but I'm here to make it really, really simple. Any hue that is on the warm side of the color wheel, which is red, orange, and yellow, is going to be overall a warm color. So it would be wrong to call a color that has its hue as red a cool color overall. Like side with cool colors, any color that sits on this side of the color wheel is going to be overall cool. So purple, blue, and green are going to be overall cool colors. Now within each hue, you can have warmer or cooler variations of that hue. Overall, if it's a red, it's still gonna be warm. This is just an example, but here we have red, which is the hue. And you can see that there's a warmer variation of red and a cooler variation of red. So how I would label this as this is a warm red with a warm undertone, and this is a warm red with a cool undertone. Overall, the colors on either side are warm. One just has warmer undertones and one has cooler undertones. Ever After is my favorite pigment company. I love working with them with permanent makeup. I love using them for lip tattoos. I love the heel results of them. This is Secret Wish, so let's use this as an example. The hue of Secret Wish is orange. However, it is not pure, so it has a low saturation because it's not a pure, intense orange. On a scale of black to white, it has a light value, and you can see that it is warm. Learning how to identify and differentiate colors takes time. In the beginning, when I was learning this as well, I constantly had to refer to this image and practice around the room, so I recommend you do the same as well. You're not gonna be able to learn this in a short amount of time. Okay, so just to compare, these two both have a purple hue. They both have a similar saturation and not too different of a value. This one has a dark value, this one I would say is like a medium dark, but the temperatures are very different. So I would consider them both cool purple. One is cool undertones, one is warm undertones. The reason this one has warm undertones is because it's leaning more red, and red is a warmer color. Here are two pinks. We know that pink is a tint of red, so the hues of these must be red. They both have a similar saturation, and they both have a similar value. They're both light. But as you can see, they're both overall warm because they're both red hued. One has warmer undertones that leans more peach, and one has cooler undertones, which leans more purple. Sometimes you come across a color like this. Certain people may label this as a red, and certain people may label this as a purple, depending on what color that you label it as. If you consider this a red, it has to have really cool undertones because it does look quite purpley. If you consider it a purple, it's not wrong, it just has to have really warm undertones because it's quite red. This is considered a neutral color, but you can get more specific with it, as you can tell. And whether you think it's purple or I think it's red, we can both agree on the temperature and where we meet with the color. If you're not sure what the hue of the color is, look at the temperature first, and that'll indicate to you what the hue is. So if you see this as cool, first and foremost, this is going to be labeled as a purple for you, versus if you see this as warm overall and warm first, it's going to be labeled as a red for you. There are two things you can do at home that will help you see the characteristics of your color more clear, specifically the undertone. The first practice thing you can do is add a drop of pigment to a glass of water, and the diluted version of this color in the water will really reveal the undertone of the color. If you're unsure, it's kind of fun to do this for your pigments, and it just gives you a better idea of what has a cooler undertone or what has a warmer undertone. Another way to see the undertone of your pigment is by doing a drawdown. So what you'll need is some water, a Q-tip, and your pigment bottle. And all you need to do is place a drop of pigment on the paper, dip your Q-tip in the water, and then slowly drag the pigment down. Okay, so here's my drawdowns, which really helps you see the undertones of the colors. Generally, when the pigment fades, disregarding all other factors like skin and the client's coloring of their skin, this is generally how these pigments will heal on the skin. I just wanted to cover this really quick, but in lip tattooing, we mostly are using variations of red. Most of your clients are gonna want pink healed results, different variations of pink, maybe different variations of coral. Those are the two main colors that we use in lip tattooing. Occasionally, we're able to use something more purple on a client, and sometimes we may even need yellow for a dark lip neutralization, but mostly what we're using is different variations of red, orange, and sometimes purple and yellow. In lip tattooing and in color theory, there's 3 important color harmonies that I want to teach you that'll help you with your lip tattooing results. The first color harmony to discuss is analogous colors. Analogous colors are colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel, like orange and red. When you mix orange and red together, there is very little difference. The same goes for saturation, value, and temperature. When you mix 2 light colors together, you get very little difference in the value shift. Versus when you mix something really dark and really light, it creates something completely new. So the mixture will be no longer dark and no longer light, but somewhere in the middle. The same goes with saturation. If you mix 2 highly saturated colors together, there's going to be very little difference in the result when it comes to saturation. There's going to be almost no saturation shift. Versus when you use a highly saturated color and a lowly saturated color, you get a big difference in the new mixture. Same with temperature. When you mix 2 warm colors together, you don't get a big difference in the temperature of the new created color. However, when you mix something really warm and something cooler, you're going to get a bigger difference in the end mixture for the temperature. Complementary colors is the second color harmony that I'm going to talk about. Complementary colors are 2 colors opposite to each other on the color wheel, and when you mix these 2 colors together, they cancel each other out. Again, like we discussed, the same goes for saturation, value, and temperature. The third color harmony that I'm going to be discussing is simultaneous contrast. This is when you place one particular color against a different background and it makes the original color appear quite different. You see, they almost look like 2 different colors. You see, because of contrast, even though these 2 colors are the exact same in the smaller squares, because this square is placed against a darker background, the color appears lighter. Whereas on this side, because the background is lighter, the inner square color now appears darker, even though these 2 colors are the same. Against different contrasts and backgrounds, they look like 2 completely different colors. This law applies on skin tones as well. So we've talked about skin, we've talked about how to tattoo your pigments into the skin for certain results, and we've talked about color. Now we're going to talk about pigment formula and how certain formulas affect the way your tattoo heals. When it comes to pigments, I prefer organic pigments. Organic pigments are brighter, they last longer, the molecular size of them is smaller, which means they're going to be easier to tattoo in the skin. And the reason I prefer organic pigments is because I find them more versatile. Again, I want to be the artist. I want to be able to adjust my technique on any given client. I don't want to be limited when it comes to my tools. So with organic pigments, considering the way that I apply the pigment, I can adjust how intense the healed result is going to be, or if it's going to be more natural. My favorite permanent makeup pigments to use are Ever After pigments. They're based on years and years and years of research, and there's no additives or anything in them, it's just pure pigment and water. Ever After pigments are actually the highest pigment load available for permanent makeup on the market. You will not find another brand that has a higher load of pigment than Ever After pigments. Even though I am sponsored by Ever After pigments, I'm not recommending them for any particular reason other than I just really love the pigments and I believe in them, and I think everyone should have them in their kit. If you struggle with healed results, if you don't like working with thinner consistencies, these pigments are amazing. I love using them for my clients, and I've been using them for 7 years. Other pigment lines or brands may pre-dilute or have other additives or solvents in their pigments that modify how the pigment goes into the skin and how it heals. Like said, I love Ever After because if I want to modify it or dilute it with a dilution solution, I always can. But I just love how the pigments are so basic and all you have is essentially what you need, which is pigment and water. So these Ever After pigments come pre-made, and what's in a bottle is pigment powder, which you see on the back row here, and some of these mixed together actually create this color. Another thing that you may have in your pigment bottle in another line is an additive, a solvent, or a binding agent. And basically what these do is they play with the pigment and help it enter into the skin. However, there is no real test or study done that things like glycerin or rosin or alcohol disinfect or add any positive to the tattooing being dispersed into the skin, which is another reason why I love Ever After, because it's just the classic stuff, pigment and water. In an Ever After pigment color, you have these core pigments mixed together that create this color, and water. Ever After sent these to me while I was working on a project with them. I don't use them, you don't use them, but I just wanted to showcase them here because I thought that it was kind of interesting to see. So with Ever After pigments, if you go to their website, they actually show exactly what pigments make up a particular color. So for example, this is Passion, and they also show you the drawdown. So if you're ever curious about what is exactly making up a color that you have in your collection, you can go to the Ever After website if you have Ever After pigments and see, or you can Google MSDS, which is the Material Safety Data Sheet for the pigment brand that you use, and search up the pigment that you want to see. So for my favorite neutralization pigment, this isn't an Ever After pigment, but all that I did was I Googled Bora Bora Peach, which is the color, Material Safety Data Sheet on Google, and this is what's come up. So I can see here exactly what's in the pigment and read more about the details of the product. So when it comes to light fastness of pigments or fade durability of the pigments, we don't have any specific testing regarding to how these pigments fade in the skin. However, we can compare how these pigments fade when exposed to the sun amongst other industries like painting and textiles. So as a general rule, warmer and lighter pigments will not last as long in the skin. Darker and bold colors will have a longer light fastness in the skin. Titanium dioxide is a very controversial pigment. A lot of people believe that this pigment lasts a really long time in the skin. But adding titanium dioxide to a red can actually decrease the fade durability of this red. Titanium dioxide has a very large molecular size, and it's the most reflective pigment out of all the pigments, which means that in thin and translucent skins, you're gonna see it very strongly. In thicker skins or skins with melanin, because the melanin covers the reflectiveness of this pigment, you don't see titanium as much. There are a lot of botched works in this industry, and a lot of people put the blame on titanium dioxide. But I'm here to tell you, it's not titanium dioxide alone, it's the artist and how the artist applied the pigment and who they applied it on. Once again, because this pigment is so reflective and the molecular size is so large, if you place this pigment in a very translucent, thin skin, and you place a lot of it, you're gonna see that white pigment in the skin for a long period of time. Because other pigments white might be mixed with have a smaller molecular size and that they absorb more UVB and UVA rays, these pigments will fade faster in the skin when mixed with white. White reflects UVB and UVA rays, and it doesn't break down the pigment as easily. What I'm about to show you is the botched titanium dioxide horror stories that commonly people refer to when they teach you not to use titanium dioxide. But let's notice what's in common amongst these cases. I'm not sure if you noticed something similar amongst these botched cases, but what is common in these botched cases, and a common denominator, is that titanium can't be held in a thin translucent skin very beautifully, especially amongst older ones or those with sun-damaged skin. So as you can see, if we go through the images again, all these ones are Caucasian, Fitzpatrick 1, 2, maybe 3. They all have a little bit of sun damage, they don't have the best skin, and their skin is very translucent and thin, which means that the titanium dioxide is very prevalent. Especially in some of these cases, you can see that the skin was very overworked with too much titanium dioxide, and that's what leads to these healed results. So these unfortunate results happen not because of titanium dioxide itself, but because of who applied it, how they applied it, and where they applied it on. Artists, I'm not sure if you're in any of the permanent makeup Facebook groups, but I'm sure you noticed very seldomly that you'll see cases like this on those with melanated lips or on those with thicker skins. The reason for that is because the thickness of the skin and the skin not being transparent has more room to hold this pigment. Also, when applied correctly, it shouldn't be overworked in the skin and can add a lot of opacity to the healed tattoo in a good way. So on clients like this, who have very thin, fragile skin, who have sun damage, maybe who live in high sunlight environments that are always exposed to the sun, who have very translucent skin or sun damage scarring, I would never use a pigment that has a lot of titanium dioxide in it, and I would never oversaturate a high titanium dioxide pigment into that skin. Darker and thicker skin complexions can hold titanium dioxide so beautiful if applied correctly. Titanium dioxide is used in pigments to add opacity to the pigment and also to create more nudie and light colors. A lot of clients go really crazy for these colors, but it doesn't necessarily always heal the best according to how that person's skin condition is. Unfortunately, we are limited by the tattoo, and we want our clients to have the best healed results. So sometimes we do need to avoid titanium dioxide in order for our clients to have a beautiful and natural result, especially over time with healing. On those who have sun-damaged lips, or who are more mature, or have thin skin who can't hold a lot of titanium dioxide in their skin beautifully, I prefer to use pigments that don't have titanium dioxide, or you can also dilute your pigments. Another thing you can do for clients who have very thin skin is you can saturate less pigment deposit in the skin for a more natural result. Still yet, I would avoid titanium dioxide if you can. Another controversial pigment is red iron oxide. Red iron oxide is an iron oxide that acts as an organic pigment. So it does have stable qualities, and it's easy to trace how it heals over a long period of time. It's a stable pigment, whereas other iron oxide or inorganic pigments are not as stable and can really react with a person's health or skin conditions. Those pigments that are iron oxides or inorganics change more in the skin over time, whereas red iron oxide does not change as much, and it also gives a beautiful ashy tone to lip tattoos. So for a muted result amongst certain pigments, brands will put red iron oxide in the pigments to create ashiness in the color. Another way you can create ashiness in the color is by mixing white and black together with another pigment. However, unlike using red iron oxide to do this, this will heal more gray than more muted. The color that I have here from Ever After is Bare Beauty. It's made with red iron oxide and white. You can see it has ashy tones, but it's still a beautiful color. When it comes to the pigment bottles, when you're searching what's in your pigment color that you're using, Each of these pigments is labeled by a number, and the pigments that start with 77 are usually inorganic pigments. The inorganic pigments that I have here are white, black, and the other one would be red iron oxide. Just because a pigment is inorganic doesn't necessarily mean that it comes from unnatural sources. It's just a label for the pigment. Inorganic pigments are usually dull in color, they have high opacity, and they fade rather quickly. Inorganic pigments are also harder to implant in the skin, whereas organic pigments have a small molecular size, which makes it easy for the pigment particle to be implanted in the skin. They last a really long time and they produce very bright and clear results. Organic pigments generally also last longer in the skin. I saw this very cute tip on a Facebook group, my Facebook group, Lip Queens, for lip tattooing advice and tips. And this girl, what she did is she ordered stickers on Amazon and she placed them on her pigment bottles to instantly tell what's in her pigments without having to look up the CI numbers. I recommend to do this. I just bought the stickers on Amazon and I think that it's a really handy trick. It's good to know what's in your pigments so that you can better predict healed results for your clients. For example, if you see white in your pigment, you'll know that that pigment has more opacity. If you see white and black in your pigment, then you'll know that that pigment might heal a little bit more ashy or gray. Same with iron oxide, might heal a little bit more ashy or gray. You should be able to just look at your pigments and generally get an idea of what is in them though. For example, Love Spell by Ever After. If we look at it, we can see that it is red and it does have a little bit of white in it. Just by looking at it, you may not be able to tell. But what you can tell is that this red is darker and cooler than these two CI numbers, which commonly are the red ones used in pigments. So what could be added to this is a deeper purple, which is violet. And if we look at my little stickers, I can see that I put red, white, and violet as the CI numbers. Ever After pigments and some pigments also come with CI labeling. If you look at the bottle, you can actually read the CI numbers are right there to find out what's in your pigment. So I can see here that 77891 is the first pigment in this color, which is white. The pigments in here go by order. So because white is the first ingredient, this color has the most amount of white in it, versus black is the last ingredient. So that means black is the lesser amount of pigment in this color. Now I'm going to show you some client examples and we're going to do a mock client consultation, and I'm going to show you how I would tackle certain scenarios based on what the client wants. Let's say I have my client here and she wants Passion by Ever After and she's looking for a natural result, but she wants to define her borders. This is pretty simple. Because she is more mature, she has thinner skin, this color will apply beautifully on her lips and it'll retain really strongly. I still would be a little bit conservative with my pigment deposit into the skin, but she's gonna have a beautiful result because her lips are more translucent and will reflect this color very well in the healed results. Let's say this client now wants the same color. Because her skin is more thick and there's also melanin on the surface that will be covering this color is not going to show up as clearly as on this client who has more translucent and thin skin. So what should you do? What I would do is I would take a similar color to this, basically the brighter version of this, and add it 50-50 mix with this color. In order to find the brighter version of this color in your pigment collection, you first need to identify what is this pigment. To me, the hue is red, the saturation is medium, the value is medium, and the temperature is warm overall because it's red with a little bit cooler undertones. So what I have picked here is I've picked a brighter red that's overall warm but has a little bit of cooler undertones. And if you can see here, if you just add a few drops of this color to Passion, it's going to brighten Passion up, but keep the overall tone of it the same so that when you apply it on this client's lips, she will have a better healed result. Going back to our other client, if you did a 50-50 mix of this or added a few drops of this brighter red to Passion and applied it on her skin, the color would not absorb the same. It would heal really, really intense, and that's not what the client asked for. So for certain circumstances, you have to modify your colors based on what your client comes through the door with. Let's take this client for example. Let's say she wants passion. Well, if we take a look at her lips, you can tell that she's a little bit more mature. Her skin is like medium. It's not super translucent, but it's not super thick. And her skin has a lot of power to it, so she has a lot of good natural lip color. Let's say that she wants passion. You can see that there's very little contrast between these two colors of her lips and of the pigment bottle. So if we apply a sheer application of this color, she's gonna have no healed results of passion. What I would do is I would apply a full application of passion so that when the tattoo heals 50% softer and 50% of it comes out, she'll have a nicely enhanced version of her lips. However, if we do the same thing and apply passion to this client who has very thin translucent skin, this color is going to show up quite a bit because there's a lot of contrast going on. Let's take a different type of client. Let's say you have this client who walks in who wants a rosy result. It is really popular right now in the industry to avoid neutralization with orange and to go straight in with pinks or reds. That's okay, but if you use a pink or a red on a dark lip, you're either not gonna get much of a result in the healed results, or the dark areas won't be neutralized. Why? Because you're not using something light enough to cancel out the darkness, and with pink, sometimes you're not using something saturated enough to provide a really good healed result. When you work with dark lips and you want to provide a big transformation or an even result, you need something that is light, you need something that has opacity, and you need something that is very saturated. This means in your pigment, you need to have titanium dioxide, you need to have a strong, bold color, and the color needs to be light. The only practical color to use for lip blushing on the color wheel that is light and bright is orange or peach. Yellow is not a practical color, although it is light and saturated, and red is not light, even though it is saturated. Going back to this client, if we tattoo Queen of Hearts on her, what's going to happen in the healed results? She has uneven lip areas. Some of her areas are darker and some are lighter. This pigment is going to apply differently on the lighter areas than it will on the darker areas. Because this pigment isn't canceling out the darkness, all this pigment is going to do is it's going to tint her lips. It's not actually going to provide an even result. So this type of pigment on a dark lip will actually give you a more natural and tint-like result. Whereas if we use something with white that's light and saturated, what this color is going to do is it's going to cancel out what's opposite to itself, which is the dark areas, and blend in with what's similar. As you can see, the value of this is medium to light. The value of this area of her lip that is lighter is medium to light. So these two things will blend in easily together. If we look at the center of her lips have a reddish hue. They're pinkish, but we consider pink a tint of red. What's beside red on the color wheel is orange. Those two things also blend in easily together. You can also see that the saturation of this is a little bit on the medium-low side, and this is like a medium-high saturated color. So what this color is going to do is it's going to blend in more easily to this area, but really, really cancel out the dark areas because it's very opposite, providing a lot of contrast so that in the healed result, this will become a little bit peachier, but this will be completely transformed into something more nude. Let's take another client for example. Due to the thick nature of this client's skin, I know that it's going to be hard to implant the pigment and hard to retain the pigment. Also, because she has melanin in her lips, that is also going to diffuse my healed result and make the healed result harder to appear. So I know that if I use this color on this client, it's really likely that not a lot of this will show up in the healed result. However, what you can do is you can use a brighter pink, and we can predict that this color will have some healed results when she's completely healed at 6 weeks. Let's take this client again for example. If you follow me on YouTube or if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I hate using dark and cool colors for lip tattooing for dark lips. The reason this is because dark and cool colors will enhance the already existing darkness of what's going on the client's lips. So even though her lips may not be as dark as this pigment, once this pigment is implanted into her skin and mixed behind the melanin of her lips, it will even make her melanated areas look darker. Versus on the areas that don't have any melanin, this is going to heal a nice pinky shade, causing further unevenness, and it just doesn't look great for clients. Some people, when it comes to dark lip neutralization, prefer to target correct. Like I said earlier, I really don't agree with target correcting because when you place pigment in certain areas of the lips, you can see physically where that pigment has been strategically placed and it looks fake. Another reason I don't like target correcting is because how can you possibly 100% predict that your color mixture or your healed color will heal identically the same to the inner area? So in the end, you'll still be left with uneven results. So again, going back, if you use Bora Bora for the whole thing, what this is gonna do is because it has such a big contrast in color to the darker areas and not as much to the lighter areas, it's going to make a bigger difference to the darker areas than to the lighter areas. So in the end, you get a more even healed result than if you just tried to spot correct. Okay, let's take this client again for example. Some artists like to use pink to neutralize lips, but this is another thing that I don't really agree or recommend. And the reason that is because this kind of color does not have enough saturation to really show through the melanin in the healed result. Because it has white in it, and if you impact a lot of pigment into the skin, you will get that reflectiveness beneath the melanin that will kind of backlight it, lightening the melanin a little bit. But because this color doesn't have a lot of actual color or saturation to it, in the healed result, even if you pack this color in as hard as you can, you won't see that much of a difference. You might see a 10% increase in the lightening, but overall, it just wouldn't be as good as if you used a stronger, bolder color that also contains white in it. Let's say your client has a really naturally strong pigmented lip, but they want a color that is lighter than their natural lip color. I really don't recommend this because again, you'll be able to really see the tattoo coming through in each pixel as it's backlit by this darker color. This goes back to simultaneous contrast, where having that darker background is going to make each pixel of this lighter pigment more apparent and make it look extremely fake. Let's take a look at a lip like this, where the lips are very thin and translucent and you can see a lot of coolness underneath. A lot of trainers will tell you with a thin lip like this that you can see a lot of coolness to neutralize it, but I disagree. I don't think that this is necessary. The reason being is that any pigment color you choose, even another cool color, will go over top of this coolness and blanket it and add opacity. And opacity will hide everything that's underneath. So even if you use a cool color on this lip, tattooing that into the skin isn't going to enhance the coolness. It will make the tattoo cool because it's a cool tattoo, but it's not going to blend or be bad for the client's lips if she wants a cool color to her lips. It's not going to cause any problems. But what that tattoo ink will do is it's just going to blanket the coolness underneath because you're adding opacity. Sometimes when I'm doing a dark lip, my students ask me if I ever use my target color with my neutralization color, and the answer is no. One of the reasons that I don't is because it's really hard to predict how much lightening a client will have. It is hard to 100% predict healed results because there's other factors that dictate how the pigment will heal in the skin, like age, skin thickness, health, and environmental factors like sunlight. So you can never 100% predict how a pigment will heal in the skin, and it also depends on how that client took care of their tattoo. Another thing is that if we tattoo this color onto this client, I know that this has enough titanium dioxide in it, so it has enough opacity, it has enough saturation and lightness to provide a good healed result. If what happens, I add a little bit of something pink, you can see that the value of this pink is actually darker than the Bora Bora. So if I add this pink to Bora Bora, or even layer it over top, it's actually going to decrease the lightening power of the Bora Bora peach. So instead what I would do is I would lighten the lips first with neutralization, have the client come back healed. She may need another session of neutralization. But once the lips are more neutralized, then I can apply my toner color. Similar to hairdressing, hairdressers bleach first and then they tone. The reason hairdressers don't tone while the bleach is going on is because they need the bleach to really lighten the hair to a certain lightening degree before the toner can go on and produce an even, nice, beautiful result. If I wanted to dye my hair this color, what I would have to do first is bleach it. If I only bleach my hair halfway, this color when I put over top of my brownish hair isn't gonna show up as well as if I let the neutralization or the bleach fully develop to where my hair is at lightest it can be and then apply this over top. A similar process works for lip neutralization. If you're putting colors on too soon that aren't going to lighten the lips or add color, you're not gonna get a very good healed result. If I wanted to dye my hair, say this color red, it is a strong color. You might see a tint, but it's not going to show up very bright. The same with dark lips. If we add this color to this client, she's gonna end up with a nice tint, but her lips still will be uneven and they're still gonna be dark. Some people when doing neutralizations will use yellow and pink. Pink is a tint of red, so what does red and yellow mixed together make? It makes orange. Again, I prefer just to do the simplest way to neutralize dark lips, which is to use orange, which is a light, bright, saturated color with opacity, pack a lot of pigment, have the client come back neutralized, and then tone. If you're doing this and you're using pinks or reds mixed with yellows, basically what you're doing is you're creating orange in the skin, but you're doing an extra step in order to use orange. In my opinion, and what I do is I just do it simple and I just use orange. The only time I ever use yellow is maybe once a year. And when I use it is because sometimes you get clients who have extremely dark lips. And sometimes I have a color like this, which is a great color, but I don't believe that it's light enough in order to really shift that dark client's value of her lip to get lighter. So what a lot of people do, they might add white, but what white's gonna do, or something more light, is it's going to decrease the saturation of this color. But I don't want that because I want my healed results to be quite strong. And if you don't have a lot of color in the pigment that you use for dark lips, it's not gonna show up very well. So what yellow does is I might mix it a little with my orange, and what this yellow is gonna do is it's gonna lighten my orange without decreasing the saturation. So the only time I use yellow is if I'm using an orange for a dark lip that I don't believe is light enough. I'll just add a couple drops of yellow and it lightens the orange while maintaining the saturation of the color. I hope this video helped you. With all of this being said, these are just the tools that I use to help me predict my healed results. Even I cannot 100% predict my healed results. Nobody can. So when you have your client, don't feel so much pressure that you have to 100% predict what your client's lips are gonna be like when they heal. You have the tools, you have the knowledge, just do the best you can, and with all that I've taught you today, I'm sure that you can succeed. Lastly, I do have in-person and online training. If you're interested, you can check out my website, tesstattoo.com, or you can email me at tesstattoo@outlook.com for more information on my classes. I hope that you really enjoyed this video and you learned something today. Please connect, please engage with me, and please follow me because I will be posting more videos in the future. Thank you so much for watching and hope to see you in the next video.